Hi there, and welcome to this week's demo painting. So this week I am working from this reference photo I took earlier in the year of Orford Castle. So Orford is a small sort of village just near Woodbridge, and has this amazing castle, and several times thought it'd be nice to do a painting of it, so today was the day. And specifically, we've been looking this week at atmospheric perspective, so creating depth through atmosphere. And so, this one really, um, what it uses is our foreground darks are really quite dark. So under the van and the trees create a nice strong dark foreground, and then the castle itself is quite high key, meaning that the darks don't get very dark, and actually the lights don't go all the way up to white. So what we have is quite a narrow key of tonal values, and what I'm hoping is, or my ambition with the painting was to use that effect to give a feeling that the castle has got some depth. Okay, and there was another little area just above the van, behind those two trees. There is a distant row of trees, and that also there is some atmospheric perspective there. So, so that was the plan. So here I am. Now, this painting took me a bit longer than normal, and I think that's just because architectural subjects like this require a bit more focus with the drawing stage and the painting. But the drawing in particular requires a certain degree of focus, because if you get your perspective wrong, or some of the scale and the details, then it really does show up. So I was keen to try and make my drawing as accurate as possible. So we're just sketching it in now using a flat brush and a little bit of terps, and just really doing a bit of measuring and trying to place things. So this was taken whilst I was staying in Orford. So I've stayed there a couple of times in a caravan and done quite a bit of painting. Well, a few paintings out that way with mixed results. A few of them have turned out all right though, and it's a great part of Suffolk. And in particular, you get these sort of mists rolling in off the sea. So if I was visiting Orford normally, it would take me, I don't know, maybe 40 minutes or so to get out there. So it's difficult to really, well, it's not difficult, but to get out there for the early morning sun would require quite a bit of focus. But as I was staying out there in a caravan, I was able to go for a walk round and take some of these snaps. So this is almost like the golden hour, in that we have this strong contrast between light and shadow, and that makes for a great sort of basis for a painting. So there are some other areas where I am exploiting the effects of atmospheric perspective, or certainly an understanding of atmospheric perspective. So you can see in the foreground, there's illuminated on one side as a wall, and that wall is a bright orange where the sun is hitting those bricks. And that's great because the orange comes forward, and so there's nothing in the castle or behind that wall which is as bright as that or intense in colour. And so that's a really nice way to push the other objects back. So we have saturated colours in the foreground, desaturated in the back. So having sketched it out, I was happy with the tone there with my drawing. So just starting to block in the sky. And I'm trying something when I'm painting now. Although I can't do it all the time, I'm sort of thinking of this concept of laying tiles. And that idea comes from Stapleton Kearns, who has an excellent blog on painting, which I've dipped in and out of for years. And I think I may have even seen him talk about this. So you'll see that what I tend to do is put down some paint and then do a little bit of fiddling before picking up some other paint. But the suggestion here is to try and lay down one tile of paint after another. So you're not stretching the paint too thinly. And as you can see, I'm not doing that perhaps as much as I'd like, because it's a bit like they'd say Cezanne would spend, 20 minutes between brush strokes considering each one. And which I think is, it's really nice to have that sense of patience, but that's not how I've ever worked. And I tend to I like to get it blocked in and then put adjustments over the top. The trouble is though, you end up using lots of terps and thinning the paint out. And you're relying on terps to do a lot of the work, which really should be done on the palette with your color mixing. So I say, although I don't stick with that, that's one of the areas I'm working on with my painting, is to try and be a bit more deliberate with each brushstroke. And I'm also using medium there. So another reason you end up using lots of terps is because the paint's quite thick and it doesn't really sort of stretch it doesn't sort of cover the canvas very well. So there's a little bit of a fast forward. Unfortunately, it's an aspect of my camera. The camera will record for half an hour blocks and then inform me. Well, it won't inform me that it's stopped. So as you can see, we've skipped a little bit of ahead here. So I've got my foreground trees in. And now I'm getting that van in. So the tree's not really making too much distinction, just trying to get the colour and the value as accurate as possible without detail. So in that case, the trees were actually, if you squint your eyes, they're predominantly dark shapes and they act as a nice sort of foreground shape for the castle to play against. So I kept them dark and then just nudged them slightly towards the orange to give a feeling of that sort of golden light sort of striking them on the side. And here I'm putting the road in. And the road, I nudged it towards the blue. And that's because, as you can see, it's a good example. The sunlight isn't actually hitting the road now. So the only thing illuminating the road is the blue sky above. So you have the blue sky, and then the tarmac itself is a very dark blue. It has a slightly almost reflective quality. So I'm getting those purple blues basically because it's reflecting what's going on in the sky. And I think it was about this time I started to realise that the painting was going to take me longer than I sort of normally do on a Tuesday when I'm doing my tutorial videos. And but as I say, it was a rather complex scene. So it also has, you can hopefully see from the photograph, it has one of these beacons on top of a large pole in front of the castle. And I also thought it was nice to have that silhouette, that dark sort of shape of the beacon. I mean, sort of got quite a lot of character because it's like ironwork. It looks like it's from, you know, from that sort of period. So I thought that, again, a nice dark in front of the castle helps to push the castle back and create depth. So working with my shadow colours here. We're in the shadow, so everything's cool, greens, blues. It was mainly in the grass there. It was a combination of a sort of grey green and almost purples in the earth colour. So my sort of strategy at this point is to really get everything blocked in. So the first thing in a painting is you don't really go for detail. You're just trying to get the big masses in, the sort of simple shapes. And so that's what I'm trying to do here. But at the same time, I want those masses to be approximately close. So if there's variations that need to go on over the top, they're not going to be too sort of dramatic. So get everything blocked in, almost cover the canvas, and then I can start to work on detail. And here's that nice orange colour. So I'm leaving the castle because I knew that would be the more the trickiest. Obviously it's the main subject, but obviously required the most amount of focus. So I thought it was good to try and get these other areas in first. Although really for the in the process of a block in, it doesn't actually matter really which bit you do first, because I'm working on this tone ground. I can already sort of get some sense of my values. When you're working on a white canvas, it's probably more important to quickly cover the white, so at least you can appreciate your values more accurately. But on a toned canvas, you can block in. Some people like to start with all the dark objects. This approach I've done is I've sort of gone down doing the sky and then slowly working forward. Yeah, the reason that happens every now and again is because I haven't got it. I find the at the moment when it's clamped onto the easel, it's casting a shadow over the top, which doesn't help. But every now and again it tips forward, so one day it'll probably fall on the floor, and I'll have to revise that idea. So as you can see, it's quite a lot of work really, before I've even got round to the castle. And I think this is a result of the way I'm working now. I'm still trying to paint with the same sort of approach as if I was painting outdoors on location. So that's where the blocking in and trying to get the values right, all that sort of relates to that. But I think as I'm working a bit more in the studio now since lockdown, it's slowly encouraging me to a more deliberate approach, and also a bit of a slower approach, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, it's not great for making videos, but for the painting itself, I think it helps to to not always be in a rush, and just to slow down and really try and sort of question, is this the right color? Is this the right tone? Is that the right shape? As I say, we're not aiming for a completely photographic representation, but we're looking to capture the mood and for our observation to be as accurate as possible. So in some respects, for me as a painter, there's a balance there, because if I was to get like, so I could, for example, I could print this out on a bit of paper and I could sort of trace it onto the page and include everything. And that certainly wouldn't be a bad way of working. But I would be moving towards the place of almost copying, like trying to get every brick, every leaf, every twig as it is. And that would, at some point, I would sort of lose the energy of the way I paint. At the same time, I'm sort of striving to draw and colour match as accurately as possible, because actually that questioning and trying to sort of to match things, it creates a sort of it becomes very absorbing. Whereas if you go too much the other way, where you become so loose that you don't it doesn't really matter whether you've got it, right or wrong, then you can lose. Well, it becomes you're not looking anymore, and you're just sort of responding to what's there. So for me, it's always about trying to balance those aspects of painting. That ties in slightly with the idea of flow. So if ever you've come across, there's a book by a psychologist, Michael, and he's got a very strange surname. And he wrote books about flow, and he said there was this there's a sweet spot when a task is too difficult, which in this case would be like photographically representing it. It would create a feeling of overwhelm, and you would sort of feel stressed out by it. If it becomes too easy, you get bored, and that's what happens when you stop looking and you stop pushing yourself to draw accurately. But between those two, there's a point where you're trying to get it accurate, but you're also responding moment by moment, and when that happens, then you lose sense of time and you get very absorbed in what you're doing, and it's a very pleasurable state to be in. And that's one of the areas that I have sort of tried to sort of find in my painting. And as I say, I've often veered between the two, of either becoming too loose, where I sort of lose control of it, or in some cases you become so tight that you lose some of the nice effects you get from like economy of means, like fewer brush strokes and sort of everything. You overwork everything. So yeah, so balancing those two ingredients is a really it's an important area to be aware of in your painting. And probably for most people, the best thing is to sort of to identify which side you fall on and to nudge yourself in the opposite side, and then as you go, just try and go back and forth, and out of that your work will sort of develop. And it's one of the things that I'm often doing in my art classes, which is encouraging people to balance up their sort of natural inclinations. And I have both sort of types. I see, both of these extremes in my classes. From those that like to sort of splash paint around and like to be very loose and expressive, and those that become very laboured and focused and will spend, an incredibly long period of time on a painting. And so neither of those is wrong, but it's always a case of trying to help them sort of balance those sort of skills. So into the castle now. So with the castle, I'm trying to think of the way that the light is hitting those planes. So we've got another little fast forward there. So there's the castle painted. Yeah, so you can see now how the light hits the planes. It relates to the angle of the plane in relation to the light. So it's almost as if you're using the castle to describe the light source, and the more the planes tilt towards the light, the more it picks up the light. So I'm using just little, I'm not getting into brickwork, but I am trying to be suggestive of the shapes. And as you can see with the castle, um, the shadow side I've nudged towards blue. So this is it's partially related to atmospheric perspective, but it's also related to, it's the same principle as the foreground road, because the shadow side of the castle is shielded from the yellow-orange sun. It's being illuminated by the blue sky. So that's why the shadow of the castle nudges towards blue. And I think I may have mentioned this before, but I think my looking and my observation have improved because of doing the portraits. Because the portraits require, if you're trying to get a likeness, then the sort of sensing the gaps between the eyes and the nose, or the bottom of the nose and the mouth, it really does sort of push you in terms of trying to get your observation sort of accurate. So I think it's benefited and fed into my sort of normal painting. And as I was saying, I did miss it this week. It was a shame not to have that sky portrait challenge, but there we go. I'm starting to think about my classes starting again in September. So I'm already sort of considering. I spoke to Lindsay today in Brettenham, and we were talking, as she mentioned, about the hall there and how I might move forward. But because I've had a really enjoyable time with the portraits, I'm considering doing another term on portrait painting, as it was quite popular last time, although it can be a bit daunting for people that haven't painted before. People almost always, as we saw with the Sky Portrait Challenge, I think people enjoy that, the task of representing a person and then sort of seeing how everyone gets on. So I might work with that format where everyone works from the same, either the same reference or at least the same person. and I'm dipping into, I did a bit of pre-mixing with this one. So I tried to mix up a colour for the castle, even though it was just sort of more like an approximate colour. And so I mixed a big pile of that warmish orangey yellow. And that meant I could dip in and get thicker pieces of paint. I have to say, at this stage, I was, I was pleased with the paint. I was pleased with how it was going, and I think the effect of the dark trees really did help to push that castle back, and for us to feel like there was some depth and air between us and the castle. So, it's great to see these effects, and also it counteracted my. So the tendency, and I think everyone has this, is the desire would be to make the castle perhaps a bit darker than it was, but keeping the atmospheric perspective in mind encouraged me to keep those values quite light, and that helps it to go back. And also trying to treat the castle in a slightly looser way, without, trying to paint every brick and every detail. That also contributes to a feeling of depth. So you want sort of tighter focus maybe in the foreground, and then a slightly softer quality to the distant objects. And here we are doing a little bit of work to the van. Now I'd be interested to see what people think of it. Initially I was inclined, I thought, oh, it's a shame that van's there. But then I thought to myself, well, at least it places, we have an interesting contrast between the old and the new. So it's not a sort of romanticized idea of the past. It's actually more of a contemporary sort of image, playing, something a bit more modern against the sort of oldness of the castle. So it just goes to show you sometimes, don't overthink your reference material. If it's painted accurately, then it should add something. It also increases the blue, and so the blue is all helping to, the overall colour scheme of this painting is really about orange and blue. So it helps the blue as a complementary colour to orange. They help to activate each other and make each other glow. Anyway, so I'm really, unfortunately, what happened here was my battery ran out. But I'm just going to show you the final painting and just talk you through a few of the details. Okay, so here's the finished painting, and as you can see, there was a little bit more work to be done from the end of that video. So I put in the trees at the top using a rigger brush, and that worked well, trying to sort of flick the wrist somewhat, to get those sort of nice sort of S's and zigzags of the branches. And also, although I started the branches using a dark, I did in places add a little bit of light to them, as I felt that sort of brought them out. I also did a little bit more work to the beacon at the front, and there was a little emblem on the side there. I managed to get another little bit of orange sneaked in on the side of the beacon where the ironwork is. And again, I thought that really helped to create a foreground object to push the background back. The castle is largely as you saw it. I did put in a few of the windows. Again, trying to keep them nice and small, like the small windows, they all help to contribute to a feeling of scale. and then I put a little mast at the top and a few little birds. So little details, a lot of fiddling, which would have probably, you'd have probably find it a bit boring to watch all the fiddling. But next time I'll try and make sure I get all that down as well. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this week's painting. Give us a thumbs up, always helps. And send yours in and we'll have a look on Friday and see how everyone got on. Anyway, thanks a lot. Bye.